the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Saturday. Well, it's night over here. Not sure where you guys are. Let's see. I don't think we have any duplication. All right. Cool. Hopefully everybody's doing well. As you know, when I'm on the road, and I'm in Barcelona today, overlooking, it's beautiful here. I'm sitting at the desk and overlooking the marina here and the Mediterranean Sea. I always get sentimental when I'm overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, just because that's the sea I grew up with. But yeah, it's beautiful here. It's a beautiful hotel, beautiful city. However, it's always a question mark when we do these shows on the road as to the internet quality and whether it's sustainable and whether we get cut off or whatever. So have patience with me. We're always trying these things out. We're always experimenting. But have patience, and hopefully we'll be able to put in a complete show without any technical problems. It seems like that would be unusual, but let's hope that actually works. Let's see. I think there's some reason I feel like I'm too close to the camera. Am I too close to the camera, guys? I don't think I could move the camera maybe an inch back, half an inch back. All right, maybe that's a little better. All right. We are, as I said, I'm in Barcelona. For the next couple of weeks, I'll be moving around Europe, so you'll have the opportunity to experience the Yaron Brook Show from a number of different locations. Hopefully, as I said before, the internet holds up, and we have great connection no matter where we go. So we will see, but. Hopefully you guys stick with us and stay patient. All right, today Barcelona. Let's see, tomorrow we'll be in Valencia. Not tomorrow, but Monday we'll be in Valencia, and then Rome, and then Amsterdam, and then back home. So next 2 weeks, going to be bouncing around, but I will try to do as many shows as I can. There'll be off hours, obviously. They won't be a regular schedule, but I will try to fit them in whenever I see. Hey, John, it's great to see you. Haven't been on live in a long time, that I know of at least. But we really appreciate the $50. Thank you. Anyway, so in Barcelona, a great food in Spain, a favorite food place in the world. So some fantastic restaurants. Here, I'm staying in a beautiful hotel. So that's really good. As you know, I was in Israel for 9 days, and we talked about Israel. I gave you an update. As kind of news comes out of Israel, we'll fill you in on what's happening with the judiciary, and what's happening with the rule of law in Israel, and what's happening with the Israel more broadly. So we'll do that, but there's no need to jump into that right now. Today, what I want to do is catch you up on the news, or catch me up on the news, or catch up us on the news. So we're gonna do a bunch of news items, and of course I'll answer your questions, and we'll go as long as we need to go. We'll go as long as you guys want. So no, I don't think we have any real challenges here in terms of going for it. All right, let's see. I mean, the first item, obviously, in the news today is an item Equal to Reality is bringing up, and he says, would you mind saying a few words about the new British king? Yeah, I was actually planning on saying a few words about the new British king. It might not be words you guys want to hear, and I think I'll have to censor myself. But what the hell? We live in the 21st century. We live in the age of iPhones and CRISPR gene editing, and in an age of unbelievable wealth and progress and science and technology. And hundreds of thousands of people are lining up the street to welcome a king. We have kings or queens. I think the whole institution of monarchy is despicable. It should have been trashed in 1776. The British should have engaged in an uprising against their own monarchy to get rid of them. Basically, I view the monarchy as leeches and parasites. This is a family that has done nothing productive, creates nothing of value, adds nothing to anybody else's well-being. They're parasites on the taxpayers of the United Kingdom. They own palaces, like several of them. They're billionaires. What have they done to earn any of that? The great-great-grandfather stole it all. It's just, I think it's a corrupt institution. I think it's a primitive institution. I think it should be gone. Gone, gone, gone. I'd say the same thing of all the aristocrats, all the fancy titles and fancy names and snubby noses and House of Lords and whatever. House of Lords is fine if you attain membership in the House of Lords through merit, through something you did, through some achievement, fine. But to have heritability associated with that because you are knighted, your kids are somehow better or superior is absurd and ridiculous. Anyway, it really is time for the British to get rid of these monarchs. Again, they do nothing but provide fodder for the gossip newspapers. They've done nothing but I don't know, embarrass Britain, and anyway, the whole thing is nutty and quite disturbing. I mean, I saw pictures of of King Charles III. What happened to Charles II? Wasn't Charles II deposed because he was like a Catholic? And isn't that when William of Orange came and kicked him out and threw him over the channel to France? So you're named after a loser king. So he is Charles, who happened to be born of, I don't know, happened to be born to Queen Elizabeth. What gives him, and he wears this funny big hat, this big hat, and then Camilla next to him with her big hat. I think I've said what I want to say. I don't like it. I didn't like it when Elizabeth was queen. I had a certain, I don't really have any respect for Elizabeth. I watched that show, The Crown. I don't know if you guys ever watched The Crown. Everybody railed about how wonderful it was. I watched the show The Crown. I found it most of the time boring. The best part about The Crown was the interaction with Churchill. Now, Churchill is somebody interesting. Churchill is somebody I'm willing to watch a whole TV series about. Fascinating. So the most interesting part was the post-war stuff with Churchill and the switching of governments and the politics of it. But Queen Elizabeth was basically a woman who put her own life to the side, basically engaged in massive sacrifice for the sake of, I don't know what. It's not like the British people needed her, so it's not like she even sacrificed for her for some mythological thing called the monarchy and tradition. Her husband, again, a complete sacrificer, compromiser, didn't live the life he wanted to live. Neither of them really lived the lives they wanted to live. She never thought she would become queen. She became queen only because her father's brother abdicated. So they lived compromised, sad, and unhappy, and altruistic lives, living for others. They are the symbols of what what we really shouldn't have. And yes, she lived a, what might be considered an interesting life only because she lived so long and so much happened, and she got to interact with prime ministers and was engaged somewhat in the politics of England. But it's the politics was the interesting, not her, and not anything she contributed to them. So I'm very negative on monarchy. I'm very negative on aristocrats. I'm negative on monarchy everywhere. I really, really think in the 21st century we shouldn't have kings and queens and princes and prince this and princes that and books and deals and gossip and all that. I think it's absurd. But it really, the obsession of people with this really shows. Okay, so here's the big thought for today, right? The human beings in the West, in the rest of the world, it's even less. But humanity in the West has only been really free for about 250 years, and much of those people even less than that, because maybe it's only 150 years, and even those 150 years were mired by massive world wars and all kinds of other stuff. So the experience of actual freedom, the experience of individuals living free, the experience of individuals actually using their minds to shape their world, to choose their values, to pursue their lives in, let's call it, semi-freedom, is truly a great exception. And it's a young phenomena. And human beings, we're just not, it's too early. We're just not quite ready for it. We're just not quite embraced it. And we're still looking, people out there are still looking for authority figures, for people outside of themselves to consume their time with and to worry about and to think about. This is why I think it's so easy to imagine the world returning to authoritarianism, because people seem to, in some part of their consciousness, want it, some part of their mind want it. They seem attracted to it. They seem attracted to personality worship. And I think we're seeing that, just a little bit of that with the British obsession with their own royal family. Even though I know the British don't want the royal family to have political power, they still want them for something that they can't really name. Tradition, stability, but it's not the kings and queens that bring stability. It's the British people. It's elections. It's the transition of power done peacefully. That's what brings the stability, not having a kingdom. So the thought is, and Leonard Peikoff said this years ago, and it's a hard concept to understand, but it's like human society is not quite ready for liberty. It's not quite ready for to live as individuals based on one's own reason, in pursuit of one's own values. That way of life just hasn't built up enough traction and enough understanding. It isn't modeled properly. It isn't taught. It isn't educated. None of these things are in the culture. So again, we live in a world right now that's holding on, desperately to the Enlightenment, to these ideas of individualism, the ideas of reason and political freedom. And yet so much of the world and so much of humanity is still caught up in kind of a romanticization of the pre-Enlightenment world and a longing to return to it. And of course, I'm talking about the West, where freedom is 250 years old, but what do you do with Asia, which has never really felt freedom, and the places that have, let's say, Korea and Japan and Taiwan, and it's, 40, 50 years? Japan a little longer, but that's it. It really is a new phenomena that as a species we're still learning how to manage our own independence, how to manage liberty, how to manage freedom, how to figure it all out and know what it means, really. So, and I think this adoration of monarchy is a leftover vestige of that pre-Enlightenment mentality that unfortunately people still have. All right. Shazbot says, it would take Shazbot to raise this up. Shazbot says, Barcelona is the home of Manuel from Fawlty Towers. I wonder if he is considered a hero there. I don't know. That would be really interesting. He certainly is one of the comedic, one of the great comedic characters. He says almost nothing, but in Fawlty Towers, except I know nothing. Constantly. If you guys haven't watched Fawlty Towers, I highly recommend it. One of the greatest comedic shows ever. John Cleese, after Monty Python, and Manuel, who plays John Cleese runs it with his wife. Run a hotel in England. Manuel is the waiter and just generally the guy who they ask to get stuff done. He doesn't speak any English. He's from Barcelona, and it is truly one of the great comedies of all time. So Fawlty Towers, I can't remember if there's 1 or 2 seasons of it, but you can probably find it. It was a BBC show from the 1970s, I think 70s. I think it'll stand up to modern times. I think it's worth watching it. I think it's worth watching it now to see if it stands the test of time. I think it will. Okay, so that was the big one. I did want to say something about the monarchy. Got that off your chest. That's good. Let's see a few other things. This is just testing something out here. No. All right. I want to say something quick about banks. I'm not going to talk about the bank crisis that's on right now. I'll do that on a separate show, and it's still ongoing, and we'll see exactly what happens and how it all plays out. But I wanted to give you a perspective on the banking crisis, and maybe a perspective on one long-term solution to it, a long-term solution that I've been an advocate for a very long time. But I looked at the world's 100 largest banks. So the 100 largest banks in the world, and I actually have in front of me the top 30 banks, and this is based on, I'm pretty sure this is based on assets. Yes, this is based on assets, right? So I don't know how different this list would be if it was based on market cap, but to the point, market cap being market capitalization, but to the point I want to make, it doesn't really matter for that. So if you look at the list of the 30 largest banks in the world, you would expect, given the relative size of the economies, you would expect that the United States would dominate this list. In every other category, when you look at the biggest businesses in the world, the most profitable businesses in the world, the largest businesses in the world, the U.S. dominates those lists. Not necessarily do they have the number 1 or number 2, but they have a significant number of companies that appear on the list. I don't have with me just the general largest companies in the world list, but maybe the Saudi oil company ranks high, but Apple, Microsoft, and many others are going to rank high. American oil companies, all kinds of American, Walmart, retailers. A lot of American companies are going to make the list, and that's not true in banking. I've argued for many years, and I've argued on this show, one of the problems with the American banking system, one of the many problems with the American banking system, is we don't have enough big banks. Now, this goes counter to the Biden administration. It goes counter to almost all administrations thinking about this. But what the United States clearly needs is more very, very large national banks that are diversified, geographically diversified across industry, diversified in the kinds of loans they make, diversified in their deposit base, diversified generally in their source of capital. Banks that can raise capital on a global scale, that can raise additional capital when needed. We need more banks like JP Morgan Chase. If you look at the top 30 banks, the first 4 are all Chinese. Then you get the first number 5 is JP Morgan Chase. After that is a Japanese bank. After that is Bank of America. Then it's a UK bank, 2 French bank, another US bank, 2 Japanese bank, a Chinese bank, a Japanese bank. Then it's Wells Fargo. Then you get a UK bank, Chinese bank, a Spanish bank. A Spanish bank, other than 4 banks, Banco Santander is bigger than all American banks except the top 4. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, and Wells Fargo. If you look at this list, France has as many banks. France, which has a GDP that is tiny as compared to the United States. France has as many banks in the top 30 banks as the United States. Japan has the same number of banks as the United States. China has more, significantly more. Even Canada has a bank in the top 30, even though Canada is much smaller than the US. The UK has a couple of banks in the list. What the US needs is a lot more bigger banks. What the US needs is lots more consolidation in the banking system. And not just consolidation of small banks, but consolidation of small banks into bigger banks and bigger banks into even bigger banks and big banks into mega banks. And what we need is diverse, big, and I think as a consequence, much safer, much more competitive on an international scale banks. And until we really get that, our banking system is going to be in trouble. It's very susceptible to things that happen locally in small regions. Jonathan, thank you. Really appreciate the support. Banks have specialized, and they like Silicon Valley Bank, and they are very, very attuned to their local community. But of course, if there's a problem in the local community, it's a mess because they're not diversified. They don't have other sources. If loans go bad, they don't have other places geographically where loans might be going well. If people are withdrawing deposits in a particular geographic area, again, lack of diversification. So yes, one clear, easy, straightforward, and has always been the solution. I just give you this stat. Again, I've mentioned it before in the show. Over the last 250 years, the United States has had this massively fragmented banking system, lots of small banks. Canada, on the other hand, has had a very concentrated banking system, geographically diversified and few but very large banks. The United States during this period has had, I guess with this crisis, 13 bank crises. 13 bank crises. Canada, 0. Canada has never had a bank crisis. Now, Canada also had better free banking than the United States. It had a better system of free banking in the 19th century, early 20th century. Canada also has introduced a central bank later than the United States. The United States is 1914. Canada, I think, is in the 40s or 50s, so relatively late. So yes, here is one area, there are not many, one area in which the United States could learn something from Canada. Oh, here's another thing. It just occurred to me because I was reading about it in the news today. It just occurred to me that Justin Trudeau, in an interview, just in a conversation he was having with the premier of Germany at some university on a stage, they were kind of having a chit chat and interview. Justin Trudeau actually said that what Canada needs and what he sees in the future of Canada is 10 years from now, he sees Canada having invested significantly in nuclear power plants, and he sees Canada having several small, one of the small nuclear power plants, and the nuclear would be a significant source of energy in the Canadian mix, if you will, right? So that's Justin Trudeau speaking next to the Premier of Germany, who just insanely shut down 3 nuclear power plants. So Justin Trudeau, one of the worst politicians out there, one of the worst human beings maybe, certainly a leftist authoritarian type, gets it on nuclear power where the Germans don't. So you have to give credit when credit's due, even when people you despise do something right. You have to give them credit. It happens once in a while. All right, so we talked about banks. All right, let's talk about why didn't this link work? Let me just try. I'm going to try this. Just make sure this link. This is an amazing story. An amazing story out of Chicago. I talked before about the CFPB. The CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is Elizabeth Warren's baby. This is a organization, a federal agency, a federal bureaucracy, a regulatory agency established by the Dodd-Frank, the law Dodd-Frank. Elizabeth Warren wanted and tried to be the first head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It was her idea as an academic, and she made sure it passed. Congress, the Senate wouldn't approve her, so she had one of her cronies take command of it. Anyway, the Consumer Federal Protection Bureau has now sued Townstone Financial, a small Chicago area non-bank mortgage firm. So this is a firm that gives out mortgages. And it sued them for statements that were made on a podcast. A podcast by Barry Sterner, who is the owner of Townstone. He has a podcast, and on the podcast, he made statements that would discourage African-American prospective applicants from applying for mortgage loans. What were the statements that he made? Again, these are statements that would discourage them from, let's see, and this is, it's him, other company officials, all made statements on the Townsend Financial Show, which is I guess a podcast, a radio program and a podcast. And again, these would discourage prospective applicants on the basis of race from applying for credit, right? So I thought when I read this, okay, so what he's probably done is he's a racist, and he said some really awful racist things on a show. I mean, even then, it's a podcast. I don't see if the CFPB can sue him over that. Maybe under the Equal Opportunities Act, the Equal Credit Opportunities Act that was passed, they can do this. But no, but it's not even that. It's not even that the guy's a racist. What did the guy say? The guy said that South Chicago, that the neighborhoods in South Chicago were awful, crime-ridden, that they were overflowing with hoodlums, can't say hoodlums, that when you go to those areas, you drive very fast through them, you don't slow down. He also said that you don't look at anybody or lock on anyone's eyes. Now, South side of Chicago is super violent. It's one of the most violent places in the country. Chicago generally is a very violent city. And yes, these places are primarily black, but they're violent. And it is one of the most violent neighborhoods in the entire city. And, you know, it's not just, I guess it's not just South Chicago, but it's also the West Side neighborhood. You know, these talk show hosts on the podcast, they were pointing this out. They were pointing this out. Now, how can this be considered, I don't know, a violation of the law? At the very least, you would think that this would be protected under the First Amendment. This is speech under the First Amendment. You have a right to hold views. Now, as it happens, these particular views are just factual. Are they hoodlums in the south side of Chicago? Oh, yeah. Is there a lot of violence on the south side of Chicago? Yeah. If you ever happen to be in the south side of Chicago, do you drive really, really fast through the neighborhoods? Yeah, probably. And is it probably not a good idea to lock eyes with people? Yeah, probably, because of the violence. The fact that these are majority black and majority African American neighborhoods, that has nothing to do with it. It's just the crime statistics. Now, the accusation is that by saying this, he is, I don't know, what's he doing? He's discouraging people in those neighborhoods from applying for a mortgage? I don't see how. I mean, one of the realities is that a lot of banks probably are hesitant to give mortgages in these areas other than as part of the Community Reinvestment Act, which forces them to do so because, you know, home values in these neighborhoods are not particularly stable, and because of kind of the violence and the awful condition in which these neighborhoods are in. And by the way, the fact that the South Side in Chicago is violent is again a fact, but more than a fact, it's the current mayor of Chicago, the new mayor of Chicago, you know, Mr. Johnson, who's the new mayor of Chicago, right? Brandon Johnson described Austin, the West Side neighborhood, as one of the most violent neighborhoods in the entire city. I don't think he should be mayor if he dares describe a neighborhood as being violent, which of course it is. So this is just insane. CFPB, I think, is an unconstitutional entity. I'm hoping the Supreme Court rules. I think there is a ruling coming over the CFPB, and I hope they rule it unconstitutional. I certainly think it is. CFPB, whether it's constitutional or not, is one of the most evil institutions we have. It is, I think I've told you this, that it doesn't get its funding from Congress. It's not accountable to Congress. It's the head is appointed by the president, but it's funding. All the money to run it comes from the Federal Reserve. So it does not get a budget from Congress. It basically has no boss. It basically has no limitations on the purse strings. It is completely can do what it wants. And this is an example where it's clearly violating, I think this is a First Amendment case. I don't see how this can qualify as discrimination. They did nothing. How this could be a violation of the Equal Credit Opportunities Act. If it is, then the Equal Opportunities Credit Act, which I'm sure it is, the Equal Credit Opportunities Act. Just by the name, I'm sure it's a terrible bill. But it's even more terrible if this disqualifies you. And if it is, then it's a contradiction of First Amendment, and the whole law should be thrown out. The whole law should be thrown out. It gives you a little flavor of what is going on. I mean, Chicago, there was a good article today I read about Chicago. Chicago is a complete and utter basket case. It's getting worse by the minute. You know, the city has 4 big pensions but it has many other small pensions that are kind of hidden and not on the books. And all the pensions are underfunded, which means they can't pay out what they promised, but are kept afloat with taxpayer money. But there's fewer and fewer taxpayers because a lot of wealthy people are leaving Chicago and a lot of businesses are leaving Chicago. So Chicago is desperately trying to raise taxes on anything and everything, and raise this tax and that tax. They're desperate for revenue and finding revenue any way that they can, and that's what's been going on. But Chicago is a completely bankrupt city. It's just a matter of time before that manifests itself. It keeps cutting costs on everything so that it could keep funding its pension system, because who holds the political power in Chicago? The political power is completely held by the unions, primarily the teachers union. You could see that in the last elections where the guy from the teachers unions came from behind to win, even though his opponent ran on a crime platform, getting rid of crime. You know, when Chicago is riddled with crime, you think that would have been a winning proposition. Both Democrats, by the way. No, the teachers union guy won, even though he's clearly and explicitly soft on crime. Chicago is a complete and utter basket case. Every time you read a story about it, it just seems worse and worse. All right, just to remind everybody of the nature of the Yaron Brook Show, which is I offer this show for free. What I ask you is to either contribute monthly to support the show on Patreon or Subscribestar or PayPal, yaronbrookshow.com/support. You can do it there. So that's one way in which you can show support and keep this show going and fund the show. You guys do fund the show. The show exists because you provide the money to allow me to devote the time to do this show. Without your money, I couldn't do the show. I'd have to find something else to do. And of course, the other way is through Super Chat. You can ask questions. You just contribute money, like Jonathan did before with a sticker. And we have targets. And again, those targets are calibrated to make doing these shows to make them pay. And as I said before, it's just a value for value. Again, I offer them free. I put them up as podcasts. I put them up on YouTube. You can watch them live. You can watch them after the fact. All I ask in return is a monthly contribution or a super chat contribution, or both, even better. And we've done very well. And given the number of subscribers I have, I think the income coming in from this is respectable, but the super chat is important. It's also a what do you call it? It's an immediate feedback mechanism to tell me that what I am doing is value to you, because it's how you showing me that it's a value to you. All right, so thank you for all the super chatters. We have about $450 still to raise to get to our target of $650. So just keep that in mind if you'd like. Maybe what we should do is see if you guys can do $20 questions instead of $5 and $10 questions. That'll make it easier to get to our target. All right, let's see. What was I looking at here? All right. Yes, next news story. Yeah, a few updates from Russia. I mean, the last couple of days, wow. No yet counteroffensive by the Ukrainians, so we haven't seen that. It's anticipated later in May, so I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of May we saw a significant move on the front by the Ukrainians against the Russian forces. I think Russia continues to flounder on the battlefield, continues not quite to know what it's doing. I thought this was a pretty funny story that came out, I think, yesterday. Well, yesterday, the head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group put out a couple of videos. And in one of the videos, he announced that his forces are going to retreat from Bakhmut. And he just, was swearing constantly And in the background, he was standing in a field, and in the background, the field was filled with corpses of Russian soldiers. This is Prigozhin, who's the head of the owner and head of the Wagner Group, and there were just these corpses lying on the ground behind him, and he's just calling the Russian military commanders, the defense minister, the chief of the general staff. He's calling them scumbags. He said they would rot in hell, they would burn in hell. He argued that they had not provided the Wagner Group with ammunition, and as a consequence, he was abandoning Bakhmut. He was leaving. Now, it turns out today he came out with a different video, and he said he's not leaving, but he is leaving, but he's planning to hand over his Bakhmut positions to the Chechen forces under the command of the leader of the Chechen Republic, the dictator of the Chechen Republic, a brutal guy, and that's what he's doing. But he continued to call the Russian defense minister and the chief of the general staff just names and just horror. And in the meantime, again, surrounded by these body bags, he said all these corpses are their fault. They didn't provide enough ammunition. They didn't allow him to win. He could have taken Bakhmut a long time ago. They didn't allow him to take Bakhmut. Anyway, so it seems like in Russia there's this real upheaval, real confusion, real fighting going on internally between different elements within the Kremlin. I mean, the only way the guy can get away with calling these senior officials, get away with calling them the names that he's calling them, is because he's very close to Putin. But so is the defense ministers. You have to wonder, Putin's kind of playing them both against each other. Who knows what's going on there? But it really does seem like it's just a complete disaster there. Everybody's kind of waiting to see what the Ukrainians are going to do. In the meantime, we've seen a number of attacks inside Russia. So a number of rail lines have been destroyed. A number of oil facilities have been bombed. So there have been explosions in a number of different places. There was also that weird video of a couple of drones supposedly being shot down above the Kremlin, where the Russians claimed that it was a Ukrainian attempt to assassinate Putin, which seems completely nutty to me. Probably a couple of kids playing with their drones, and they got them shot off over the Kremlin. So that, that is interesting. There've been car blasts, there've been bombings. So it looks like, for whatever reason, Ukraine has become very active in the background, maybe to try to block the means by which the Russians could reinforce a particular sector if the Ukrainians are going to attack that sector. We will see. But the Ukrainians are now have significant numbers of Western tanks. I think they have 200, maybe 250 Western tanks, Leopard tanks, British tanks, some Swedish tanks. They have been trained by Western forces on their use. They have other weapon systems that they've gained from the West that they are being trained in the use. We'll talk about one of them in a minute. And they're basically getting ready to move, and we will see what that movement looks like, and where they plan to attack and what they plan to do exactly. But I still hold what I've held since the beginning of this war, that Russia is much, much weaker than people expect. Russia has overwhelming force. It has numbers, but it has awful strategy, awful weapon systems, unmotivated soldiers, and that has taken a massive toll on the Russian military to date. And even though Russia occupies Ukrainian land, Russia is in a position still to lose this war. And Ukraine, I think, is in a position to regain their lost land over time. And what happens in the next couple of months is going to be key. It's going to be really crucial if Ukraine wants to win this. I think the next couple of months are going to be very crucial to that victory. we will see how that ultimately plays out. But yes, I will be giving, once the counteroffensive of the Ukrainians starts, I'll be giving many more updates, and we'll use maps, and we'll do it the way we did it originally, and I'll show you what's going on live. Well, not live, but as it happens out there. Let's see. Why is okay? I got one other little problem here, which is weird. Give me a second. See why this is not working. This is not working. That's that. What if that's not working either? Let me do this. I know I'm going to be in the dark for a little bit. All right, let's see if that'll work. All right, let's see. Where was I? Yes, so that's kind of an update quickly. One other update, which I think is quite interesting and important because it has much wider implications, and this is one, and I apologize for the new setting, which is much darker, but we'll survive. This one is really interesting because it has manifestations, or it has implications on a much larger front. According to Ukrainian Air Force or Air Defense authorities, the people in Kiev who are responsible for air defense, they claimed on Saturday, Friday night, they actually downed a Russian hypersonic missile over Kiev. So this is stunning, right? Hypersonic missiles that the Russians have and the Chinese have are supposedly untouchable. It is assumed that these missiles cannot be shot down by any known technology. It turns out, if this story is true, this is massive. Because if they shut it down with an American Patriot defense system. And if the American Patriot defense systems can shoot down hypersonic missiles, that takes away a big advantage both the Russians and the Chinese were supposed to have had over the United States in terms of weapon systems. This has implications for the Pacific Front, where the Chinese have hypersonic missiles and they have hypersonic anti-ship missiles. But if the American Patriot system can knock them down, I mean, it's still nice to have hypersonic missile systems, but it takes a big chunk of the advantage, the benefit that China and Russia have, and the advantage over the United States that they might have, is gone. If you remember, we talked about hypersonics because the United States was considering using lasers on them and developing whole new laser technologies where they don't need to because they already have the Patriots. And if the Patriot system can knock these down, it wouldn't be that difficult, and I'm sure this is already happening, that Patriot-like systems are on some of our aircraft carriers and some of our destroyers, and therefore could take down these hypersonic missiles that were being shot at our ships. And this takes away a massive advantage that I think the Chinese assumed they had against the United States. So this is a super, you know, a super important, super important to figure out if this is true. Now, it's true that I've said all along that Russian weapon systems are not good. It really did seem like the hypersonic ones were a real advantage they had, and the United States doesn't have hypersonics yet. But it looks like they're not. So at least Russian hypersonics can be shot down by Patriot defense system. Now the question is, can that apply to Chinese? And at the very least, this places a little bit of doubt in the Chinese mind, and again reduces the probability that the Chinese would engage with Taiwan, would risk a war with the United States. Because if they thought they could win such a war, they thought at least they could neutralize the American fleet, then that would encourage them to engage in such a war. But if they think that the key weapon in destroying American ships is susceptible to being knocked out of the sky by Patriot missile systems, then it causes them to, again, think twice, third time, fourth time, whatever, before launching such an attack. So I think it's really important, and hope this is real, hope this is not fake news, that this is true, and that indeed Patriot defense systems. By the way, this particular missile was launched by a MiG-31K aircraft. It was launched like everything else that the Russians do. It was launched from Russian territory, which is amazing to me, because, I mean, at this point in the war, Russia should have dominance over the airspace. It wouldn't have to shoot missiles from its own territory. It should be able to fly everywhere over the skies of Ukraine. And now it can't because of the Patriot missile systems, but you think they would have been able to in the past. All I can say is the Russian Air Force and the Russian military and the Russian weapon systems have just been pathetic. Shockingly so, even to me, and I've never thought much about them. All right. China is the real danger, but you know, again, I think China has to have second thoughts about its superiority with hypersonics, because it was assumed again that the U.S. couldn't shoot down hypersonics no matter from whom, Russian or Chinese. So who knows? You know, as I've told you before, I'm worried about China, but then I'm not too worried about China either, because it's another authoritarian state with an authoritarian army that is dumb. The Chinese army is dumb. It's not a smart army. It's not a well-coordinated army. It's not a modern army in any respect. It's still an army that has much of the same kind of, I think, thinking that the Russian army has. You just throw numbers at it, and that's not going to be a solution in modern warfare. They've only started modernizing their thinking about combat since 2014. They've tried. They're still way behind. You know, modern warfare is a intricate, difficult coordination effort between air, ground, sea, special forces, armored, infantry, and artillery, and everything else. It's a very, very complex, highly advanced technologically. I don't think China has the capabilities. I don't think they have the thinking, and they don't have the experience. The reality is that the last war China fought was in 1979 against Vietnam. It didn't do particularly well. It beat Vietnam, but that wasn't a big deal. But it didn't do particularly well. But of course, that was before China modernized and grew rich. But it has no experience. I mean, if you compare that to the U.S., which has fought several wars, which is engaged in complex delivery of weapon systems. Yeah, so I am dubious about the Chinese military's might. I would still, on a head-to-head, I would still take the American military any day. And I think now that the United States is focusing more on China, which it is now, and more so even under Biden than under Trump. Yeah, I mean, I don't think China has a chance. All right, let me just ask that questions coming in from now on, because we've got a lot of them, and I'll start answering questions in a minute, questions be $20 or more, so that we're getting close to our goal, so we're not far from the goal. We've kind of crossed the halfway mark, so I think we're heading in the right direction. But if you are going to ask a question, please make it a $20 or more question. Let me just quickly go through the news items just to make sure that I've covered the things I wanted. I think that's it. Let me just, because I want to end on like a positive note well, just one funny one. The White House Thursday invited chief executives of the big tech companies in to tell them that they really needed to think about AI and they really needed to be careful, and they really needed to consider how their industry should be regulated. I just find it funny anytime politicians try to intervene in a space they know nothing about. But there were a few good, really interesting news stories. Science stuff that's good. Okay, so another positive news on the Alzheimer's front. So Alzheimer's was slowed by up to 35% of reduced development in volunteers of a 1,700-person study for a new drug called donanemab that's manufactured by Eli Lilly. These are the first generation. We're really on the cusp of the first generation of Alzheimer treatments. They won't cure the disease, but will slow its progression. They will add valuable, high quality, life quality time to people who are susceptible to Alzheimer's disease or who have Alzheimer's already starting, but is still not debilitating. What's interesting about this first generation of drugs, these are the first drugs that target amyloid deposits that are actually working. For many, many years, for 30 years, it's believed that amyloid deposits are a sign of Alzheimer's, and if we could get rid of those deposits, Alzheimer's would get better. Drugs that targeted those amyloid deposits did nothing. These are the first drugs that are actually having an impact. Part of the reason they're having an impact is because they're being given to people with early onset, very early. So now we can detect Alzheimer's very early, so we can give the drug very early to slow its progression. But also because the drugs have gotten better. So there really is progress being made in the fight against Alzheimer's, and for the first time, I think, since the beginning, since attempts were tried at this. So it's really, really exciting. Let's see. Okay, a longevity breakthrough. Scientists have been able to increase the lifespan of, drum roll please, yeast cells. I know it's not that exciting, but if you can extend the lifespan of yeast cells, that's the beginning of technologies to advance the lifespan of human beings. Anyway, they have increased the lifespan of yeast cells by up to 82%. They are targeting a process by which cells' fates are decided. The team tricked cells into delaying their commitment to deteriorate. I mean, this is pretty funny. So the cells actually at some point start deteriorating, and there's a precursor to the deterioration, which is the commitment period. They can scientists can delay that commitment period, and this is a major, I guess, mechanisms of aging, the authors of the study and everything are convinced that this can be applied to more complex organisms, and ultimately to human beings in a form of gene therapy, which could extend human life significantly. anything, even in yeast cells, anything that seems like it's advancing the possibility of living longer gets a thumbs up from me. Finally, small modular reactors. We talked about nuclear before, and Justin Trudeau's comments on it. NuScale Power, which is the only small nuclear reactor design that's been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States, has actually broken ground on their first reactor this week. This is from their press release. Well, I shouldn't. It's pretty simplistic. But anyway, this is super exciting. The promise of small nuclear reactors is that they are modular, they're easy to construct, they are super safe. They can be built they can be built anywhere. They can provide electricity on a local basis. You don't have to build massive power plants. They can be built relatively quickly. Funnily enough, they can provide backup for solar and wind for when the sun doesn't shine and when the wind doesn't blow. But the real advantage is their modularity, their ease of construction, and the fact that they can be built pretty much anywhere, and they're super, super safe. So I think that's super, super exciting, and I'm looking forward to more of those kind of new reactors being built and being deployed in the world. Why am I frozen? All right, let's see, am I frozen? Guys, am I frozen? Doesn't look like I'm frozen. I look okay. I'm frozen over there. I'm not frozen over here. All right, so that was, that's our news update. It's a little longer than usual because had a lot to cover and I haven't done one of these in a long time. All right, let's do Super Chat. Let's jump into the Super Chat. We are still about $300 short, so please consider the value for value associated with that. $5 from everybody listening right now would get us over the top, so please consider that. Okay, Richard is here. Richard for $50. So Richard says, I will be visiting the Pentagon. Wow. To present my group project on supply chain resilience. What are some of the most important issues to emphasize when speaking to the military? How U.S. regulations and immigration laws harm U.S. national security? Yes, I mean, what the Pentagon should be most interested in for national security purposes, but also for liberty purposes and maintaining just the U.S. And the nature of the U.S. is in technological progress, in the United States keeping its dramatic advantage it has over China, certainly over Russia, but over China, in the technological sphere. We need to have the most advanced, most advanced weapon systems, but we need to have the most advanced telecommunication systems. We need to have the most advanced, lasers. We need to have the most advanced capacities to be able to take on anything that China throws at us in a war. And we need to be able to do this at a low cost to lives, to American lives. And so I think what they need to be convinced of, I think they know that. And then the question is, what generates technological progress? And I think to a large extent, generals probably think it's just throwing more money at it. They need a bigger budget. They need to be able to throw more money at technology. But the real thing is most of these technological advancements, or certainly most of the improvements of the technologies, most of the advancements of the technologies, ultimately are generated in the private sector. And what the Pentagon needs is a thriving technology sector. Not a technology sector that is demonized, not a technology sector where big tech is afraid of being broken up, not a technology sector which has just a few players, but a technology sector where venture capitalists are investing money in significant new ventures, where that is dynamic, exciting, new innovation. Not a technology sector that is on pause on AI, or where the government is going to regulate AI, but a technology sector that is dynamic and constantly pushing forward. And for that, you need, as you note, two things. You need deregulation. You need government to get out of the way. And in technology, it's relatively easy because it's not heavily regulated yet. It's the threat of more regulations that is at the forefront, and it's this the regulations that are coming into the tech sector because of things like the CHIP Act that have all the baggage associated with it. It's subsidies from the government, which is destructive, not helpful. So deregulation, getting rid of subsidies, getting rid of planning, getting rid of government planning for these things. I mean, other than in Defense Department for the government to spend on chip manufacturing, and then to be massively pro-immigration. We should be importing every engineer who wants to come to this country. I mean, we should be importing a lot, we should be allowing a lot more people to come to this country. But certainly every Chinese engineer, every Korean engineer, every European engineer, every Israeli engineer, every Nigerian engineer, every Mexican engineer, any Brazilian engineer who wants to come to this country should be allowed in. That would give us such a huge advantage over insular countries like Russia and China, who are losing engineers. And particularly Russia's lost tens of thousands of engineers. China would lose them if they had somewhere to go to, like the United States. So that is not something you can, it's not something, we can pretend that we're going to improve our educational system, we'll get more American engineers. It's not going to happen. You want the best engineers in the world, you got to allow them to come in. You got to hire them. You got to bring them to the United States. And then finally, they've got to reform the way they do the purchasing at the Pentagon. You've got to create more competition. You've got to allow for more defense contractors. And the way to do more defense contractors is the way to do defense contract, is something that needs to be worked out. To create more of them, to have more diversity of them, to create competition between them. The way to do that is less central planning, is less dictates from the government, and more opportunities for newcomers, from startups, from new entrants into the field to be able to present against the Boeings and the Northrop Grummans and the big, what did Eisenhower call them, the military-industrial complex. You want to be able to refresh and bring in new minds, new blood. It's really new minds into that field. And of course, in terms of supply chain resiliency, I think we've talked about that. You want to bring the supply chains to friendly waters, but also you want to dramatically beef up the U.S. Navy to continue what it has done since World War II, which is protect the global supply chains, to protect the global shipping lanes. And that is essential for U.S. security. It's essential for the U.S. standard of living and quality of life. It is essential for global trade and therefore for global standard of living and wealth creation, which we benefit enormously from. Thank you, Richard. $50, very generous. Let me just do two more for Richard that are on similar topics, and then I'll go to Frank. Richard said, military officials I have spoken to so far have been receptive to these arguments and are shocked when I mention specific stats. For example, permitting for new semiconductor fabs takes 5 years, by which point the chip's obsolete. Yes, but why build fabs in the U.S. when we don't have a labor force that can actually man the fabs? I mean, what you want to do is build them in places where you can protect the shipping lanes. Maybe, yes, there are too many fabs in Taiwan and South Korea, which all have the same shipping lanes across the Pacific. So let's think about Europe. Let's think about Canada. Let's think about Mexico. Any of those places are good for fabs. They don't have to be in the U.S. And let's make it easier, therefore, for places like Mexico and Canada and Europe to build fabs and for us. And then if the Pentagon knows the kind of chips and specific chips that it needs, and it's worried that in times of crisis it won't have enough access to those chips, then build the fabs that are necessary for the Pentagon in the United States at whatever cost that is required, and get around all these ridiculous permitting requirements. And build it, national security. If we can put on tariffs for pretend national security causes, can we dismiss a bunch of regulations for real national security concerns, like building a fab that just produces chips for the Pentagon? Okay, and then Richard goes on a different note, What should the U.S. have done during World War II vis-a-vis the Soviets? Was our alliance with the USSR necessary to defeat Nazi Germany? Do you have any sources you'd recommend on the early Cold War? I don't have any sources on the early Cold War, unfortunately. I mean, as a military historian, I really like Victor Davis Hanson. I really enjoy his military history. I don't like a lot of other stuff he writes, but the military history is very, very good. I don't think the United States should have supplied weapons to the USSR. I think the United States should have left Stalin to fight by whatever means he had. And if that meant he would lose, then that meant he would lose. It's not clear that he would. But it would have slowed down his progress. That is, I think that Stalin was holding back Hitler without the U.S., but certainly he wouldn't have been able to advance as fast as he did in Eastern Europe without U.S. help. The U.S. should not have supplied one little piece of material to the Russians. I mean, if the U.S. had slowed down Russian progress, then Eastern Europe might have been part of the West, so tens of millions of people might not have been enslaved to the Soviets. I think also it's not clear that the Soviet Union would have been as strong militarily. They wouldn't have captured as many German scientists. They wouldn't have developed their rocket systems quite as well. I mean, there are many, many things that would have happened if the Soviets would have been bogged down against the Germans rather than pushing them and moving fast and taking Eastern Europe. So my view is the U.S. should have never helped the Soviets. We should have it is ridiculous and pathetic that we sustained a regime as horrific as the Nazis in order to defeat the Nazis. We could have defeated the Nazis without supplying weapons to the Soviets. All right, Frank, $50. That is, I mean, that's terrific. Thank you, Frank. Really appreciate it. We're about $200 short of our $650 goal, so hopefully we can still make it today. Let's see. Frank says, isn't leftism and rightism the playing out of Christianity? The belief that objective truth is impossible and all that is left is power, politics, and control to mitigate man's arrogance. Yes, I mean, I think it is fundamentally. Certainly communism, I've talked about this before, is a manifestation of Christianity to secularization of the Christians, manifestation of the Christian moral theory, and also the Platonic theory of truth is not accessible through reason and reality, but through some kind of form of revelation. Even if the communists didn't call it revelation, I think that is true of both the fascists and the communists, and therefore, yes, of the consistent forms of leftism and rightism. They both, left and right, statism, authoritarianism, embrace altruism completely, embrace collectivism completely. They replace God maybe with the state or replace God with the proletarian. But it's still true that your life is meaningless. What is meaningful is your sacrifice to the state, your sacrifice to the proletarian, your sacrifice to the global middle working class, your sacrifice to your race, your sacrifice to God. It's all the same. And epistemologically, you have no access to truth. You have no access to real knowledge. It all has to be mediated through a pope, through a church, through a dictator, through a leader, through somebody else. So absolutely, Christianity is sadly has dominated the world for 2,000 plus years, and now continues to dominate through its secular stepchildren. Okay, Moondog. I don't know Moondog. All right. Moondog says, as a person from Boston, I take great pride that my ancestors refused to pay taxes to the monarchy any longer. The monarch's response was war. The same bloodlines we are celebrating today. It's offensive. I agree with you completely, although I'm a little skeptical about you taking credit for your ancestors doing the right thing, but put that aside, or taking pride in that. But yes, I mean, I guess I take pride in the fact that I think I would have responded like your ancestors. And yes, this monarchy business is horrible. John, $50, thank you, really appreciate it. John says, I'm in Barcelona later this month. Would love any great restaurant recommendations. I understand if you don't want to take time on the show to answer. Yeah, I mean, I have a little database, John, of my recommendations. Happy to do it. How many nights are you here? I could probably fill every night of your stay with a world-class. I mean, Barcelona has some of the best restaurants in the world, and the food here is phenomenal and amazing. So yes, let me do this. I will send you an email with those recommendations. And if you don't hear from here later tonight, please drop me an email and remind me. But absolutely happy to do that. All right. Thank you, John. Thanks for the support. Amazing. All right, Richard again. Oh, well, no. Let me go back to Andrew. These have been here for a while. Andrew has, this comes from conservative media, so not sure if it's accurate. But what do you make of Ford losing $60K on every electric vehicle it makes? Doesn't surprise me. $60K sounds like a lot, so that's surprising. But it doesn't surprise me they're losing money on it. You know, electric vehicles are expensive to make, particularly given the new rules by the Biden administration that make it impossible for America, or if American car manufacturers use like Chinese batteries or Chinese lithium in order to make their cars, they don't get the tax credit. So in order to get the tax credit, American manufacturers have to build expensive cars because they have to use batteries that I think made in Canada or made in the US with lithium sourced from who knows where. So there's a real challenge. So the cars are very expensive to make. They also, as with any kind of manufactured product, to really get the cost down, you have to make them in large quantities, and they just not selling enough electric cars in the U.S. To make them worthwhile. And finally, Tesla, which does make large quantities of electric cars and has been doing for a long time, and therefore got the art of making these cars down. Tesla cut its prices dramatically over the last few months. And Ford has had to match Tesla's prices. And as a consequence of Ford having to match Tesla's prices, I'm just not surprised Ford is losing money. It can't use the cheapest, best technology because the Biden administration doesn't want it to. It's, you know, it hasn't been able to ramp up production enough to get economies of scale. And it has to match Tesla, which got subsidized years and years ago, to get to the point where it can produce so many cars as it does today. It can't match Tesla's prices. So it's a really difficult business to be in. The company is doing probably best with electric cars in the world right now, the Chinese companies, because the Chinese companies can build in large quantities. The Chinese auto market is massively going to electric. One of the reasons China is, you know, accelerating the building of electric power plants is to be able to provide electricity for all the charging stations for all these cars. The United States, even if we switch tomorrow to all electric, our grid would collapse. The Chinese have a much more modern grid, and they're building a lot more electric. They have no problem with nuclear. They have no problem with coal. They have no problem with gas. They will create. They're not obsessed with sunshine and wind to provide energy, and therefore they are far ahead of us in terms of producing electricity. So it doesn't surprise me Ford is losing. 60,000 seems like too much. That seems wrong, but who knows? Andrew also says, a coworker from Chicago was explaining how people are afraid of flash mobs now. Yes, there are these flash mobs now in Chicago, forming and attacking people on its main streets for restaurants, etc. that has been happening more often. In a Yaron voice says, move. Seriously, move. What's wrong with you, Chicago people? But yes, I've seen pictures of these mobs outside of, in some of the nicest areas in town, outside of fancy stores, nice restaurants, and they just start pushing people and harassing people. Chicago's just, right now, it seems like, I haven't been in Chicago in a few years now, since before COVID, doesn't seem like a pleasant place to be. Doesn't seem like a pleasant place to be. Now, granted, the media twists things, and it always seems worse, listen from the media, but I really think bad stuff is happening there, and I don't see where the good is going to come from. All right, we're only $134 short of our goal today. Did you see the leaked memo titled, this is from Josh, Google, we have no moat, and neither does OpenAI. Interesting read and curious for your thoughts. I have not. Let me put that aside and see if I can read it and see what it's about. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff being listened to and thought about and about AI. Here's a thought about AI that's kind of interesting. One of the reasons AI has been able to learn, in quotes, so much is it's had access to gazillions of websites for free. So it's been able to absorb all these images, not absorb, analyze images and text and from all these websites for free. And in a sense, all these websites have allowed Google and have allowed OpenAI to do this. But now they're changing their minds. And here's what AI might cause to happen on the web. The web might become less free. Or set up some kind of restrictions to prohibit bots, AI bots, from just accessing its information. They might let you access the information, but not bots. And I think people are working on bot identification stuff that will be able to restrict bots from accessing websites. So the Getty Images library, massive library of images of artwork and architecture and photographs. I mean, one of the ways AI is creating images is by basically analyzing the images from the Getty library. And the Getty's saying, wait a minute, we didn't give you permission to do that. We didn't give permission to use it for that. And I think there's a lawsuit going on right now. I mean, this is an area that's going to have to develop in the law and in technology of how to deal with AI, and should AI just have access to everything as if it's free. So there's a lot to think about, a lot that's going to happen, a lot that's going to change in the next 10 years because of AI. But I'm interested in seeing the no moat, which I assume means because a moat would keep Google AI inside Google, right? But if there's no moat, Google AI can go anywhere and do anything, and scary stuff. I'm not scared of AI. I'm more scared of I'm more scared of people being scared. I'm scared of the fear. Richard said, thanks, Yaron. The more I read about it, the more U.S. policy toward the USSR seems insane. We sold the grain. Yes, we did. Throughout the Cold War, and a major argument was that this helped reduce U.S. trade deficit. Oh, my God. Well, the Cold War was a waste in many respects, right? First of all, instead of conceiving of the USSR as a failed entity, instead of conceiving of the USSR as ultimately collapsing because communism couldn't be successful, we thought we had to be active in order to cause it to collapse, which led us down all kinds of bad paths, like wars in Korea and South Vietnam, or in Vietnam, which cost the U.S. gazillions and cost blood and lives and all of that, which is just horrific. Imagine all that talent, imagine all that capital being invested in the U.S. instead of being wasted on the battlefields in wars we lost anyway. We think about the fact that we basically allowed the Europeans to free ride off of the United States, so that Europe never invested in its own defense. Part of that was to prevent Germany from building up a military, but I'm not sure that was a good enough reason. We didn't, because we provided them with a nuclear umbrella, because we provided them with troops on the ground. The Europeans were expected not to build a military force. We're still suffering from that fact today. So many things about the Cold War were done wrong. We should have embargoed the USSR. We should have basically had no embassy there, had no trade with them, zero trade. This idea of reducing the trade deficit is bizarre and ridiculous. We should have let them starve. We should have let them starve and let them impoverish themselves by building up their military and let them and ignored them. We should have just ignored them. And if we'd done that, maybe the Soviet Union would have fallen much earlier. Maybe Europe would be in a much better situation today with much more responsibility for its own defense. There's so many things that were done wrong during the Cold War that we are suffering from today. So yes, the whole phenomena could have been dealt with and done dramatically differently. But that, you could do a whole history there. And one of the things that I'm worried about is that both Republicans and Democrats today seem to want a Cold War with China. They want to recreate the Cold War in some way. They're nostalgic for the Cold War. Without really understanding the Cold War, without learning without learning from it, and without thinking about what victory looks like and what is actually going on. To a large extent, I think we are, I think China's propped for this, but we are egging China on. We are encouraging it, and we are causing it to kind of be more aggressive towards us, because we don't have a strategy, a really thoughtful, thorough strategy on how to deal with it. Iron Meerkat, have you tried prompt engineering ChatGPT? The results are hilarious. I talked it into acting as an editor who writes clickbait and asked for a Tinder bio. It was like giving it crack. That sounds hilarious. I have not. I guess I don't have the time or the creativity or the imagination to do stuff like that with ChatGPT. But it sounds pretty fun, and it sounds hilarious. And yes, I'm sure you could do some pretty crazy things with ChatGPT. And I hope some of you do. Hopefully some of it's productive and something good comes of it. I have not played around with it much at all. All right. We have time for some more questions, but please make them $20 or more if you're going to do questions. We just need six more questions, and we achieve our goal, so that would be great. Michael says, we are currently in a race between technology and politics. I actually think technology is going to win. I hope you're right. I think technology buys us time, and I hope that technology buys us enough time so that ultimately we can win the political race. I don't think that technology wins. I think all technology can do is buy us time. And then we have to win. Better ideas have to win. It's only ideas that shape history. But it is true that technology can buy better ideas time to shape that history. Liam says, if everyone were honest, there would be no schisms in our movement. Oh no, I think if everyone were honest, there would probably be more schisms in our movement. And they would happen sooner, and in some ways would be deeper. So I don't think it's lack of honesty. I think schisms are a consequence of honesty. A consequence of honestly dealing with people. Right? Do you think people just had enough of altruism and crime in the late 80s and 90s? Why did they start accepting it again? There's a sense in which they had enough crime. I don't think they conceived of it in terms of altruism, but they certainly seem to have enough of people telling them what to do and how to do it. You remember the 80s, the baby boomers were called the me generation. There was a certain attitude of, I want to be successful. I want to pursue wealth. I want to be, and they were, and they did. I think it bounced back because there was no justification for it. The altruism was still there. The collectivism was still there. The statism was still there. And at the end of the day, the bounce back of the 80s and 90s was not deep enough. So the economy was still regulated, it was still controlled, so there was still a dot-com bubble, and there was still crises, and 9/11 happened. 9/11 would have never happened if in the 80s and 90s we would have a proper foreign policy. So as long as you're a mixed economy, you're not going to create an environment in which people can't say, well, you see, capitalism failed. You see, freedom failed. Ignoring the fact that it wasn't free, but blaming it all on that. So, if we'd had a decent foreign policy in the 90s, we would have had no 9/11, and that would have changed a huge amount of dynamics of the last 30 years. Richard, thank you, Richard. Flash idea. It seems like authoritarians use purity and order to justify the use of force. Can you think of other rationalizations? Oh, well, they use a lot of rationalization to justify the force. The fact that the world is complex and you need somebody to make sense of it for you because you can't make sense of it. You need somebody to be in the commanding heights to take a look and to evaluate and to assess, again, because of the complexity of the world, which is beyond you. They definitely use purity and order, but a lot of order has to do with understanding and planning and control, which they tell people is necessary. How can you let markets deal with education or healthcare? Healthcare is too important to leave to markets, to leave to the profit motive. So it's a lot of different rationalizations like that, all emanating from the same kind of Platonic, they're the philosopher kings and you don't know. The markets don't know. Do you think, Richard, thank you, do you think that the end of the Cold War was also a mistake? That we failed to proclaim the moral superiority of capitalism and practice it at home? I fear a new Cold War. U.S. should become freer and inspire the world without need, for war or co-ops. Yeah, or co-ops, or coups. Yeah, the end of the Cold War was a mistake. The conclusion at the end of the Cold War was that the history had ended. That was the famous book by Fukuyama, The End of History, which basically said communism's failed. In other words, all ideology has failed. All consistent principled ideology has failed. What has succeeded is the mixed economy, subjectivism, moral grayness, and uncommittedness. Nobody declared the victory of laissez-faire capitalism. What they declared is the victory of the mixed economy, and we're still suffering from that. So yes, we should have declared the moral superiority of capitalism. We should have preached it and lived it at home. And I, like you, fear another Cold War. I think we're heading to it head on right now as we speak. All right, only $61 short. Hopper Campbell, how is Eric Adams doing as mayor of New York City? He seems to be holding off the crazy left. Do you believe the Marines should be charged for killing that black man on the subway? Again, from everything I can see, Eric Adams is doing a decent job. He is holding off the crazy left. Crime in New York, while bad, is nowhere near as bad as other cities, and still nowhere near, not even close to how bad it was in the early 90s or in the 80s. So it's still pretty good, overall. So you have to give Adams, and given what's his name, Barr, or whatever his name is, the guy, the district attorney, who's awful. Eric Adams must be the guy who's somehow holding it together, because certainly the district attorney is not holding it together. Let's see. About the subway killing, I haven't read the story, so I just don't know. So I don't want to comment because I have no idea. I would have to really investigate and figure it out. It seems the left has created a homeless industrial complex. The homeless have essentially been granted free reign over the subway systems in downtown. Candice Owens calls it coddle culture. There's certainly coddle culture. I don't like anything coming out of Candice Owens. Candice Owens is one of the worst elements in our culture right now. And so I'm not a fan at all. I mean, worse than not a fan. I'm a detractor. So I don't like to give her credit for anything. Is there homeless industrial? There is, in a sense. There's a lot of nonprofits. There's a whole, in a sense, there's a welfare industrial complex. There's a whole welfare industry. There's a whole welfare bureaucracy. There's a homeless bureaucracy that is very motivated to keep the homeless problem in existence because that's how they have jobs. They've been granted control of a place like San Francisco and parts of other cities. This is altruism in full force, plus special interest groups that are motivated by it. The solution, as I've told you, to the homeless problem is more housing and legalization of drugs. Those are the two solutions, but those are the two solutions nobody's interested in. We live in an altruistic culture that takes people who are most needy and makes and gives them more and more and more and more. Q2 Santos, will big banks have any reason to innovate? Sure, they have to compete with other big banks. They have to compete with other big banks in other countries. There's massive competition between banks that is constantly going on. If you had 20 mega banks in the United States and 20 mega banks outside the United States, 40 is plenty of competition to have innovation and so on. Plus, I'm not against, you would still have fintech. And of course, if you got rid of regulations, who knows how many banks there would be and who knows what they would look like and who knows, the whole banking system would be different without regulations. The modern banking system exists in the way it exists because of the structure of the regulatory state. James Taylor says, what segment of society will have the hardest time when we finally start shifting to a free market society? Government employees, people with rent-controlled apartments, welfare recipients. It's really hard to tell. When we finally shift, typically older people who are part of the previous system and who have the least time to adapt. Certainly government employees, regulated and controlled businesses that are used to the controls and used to the regulations, subsidized businesses. So anybody on the government dole, I think in a sense, welfare recipients, maybe the first generation would have a hard time, but they would recover very quickly, as would businesses as the regulations went away. But the initial piece of it would be difficult for lots of people. Q Santos says, how can these unsafe neighborhoods all around the world improve their own condition? Well, the first thing you have to do in order to improve your condition is establish peace, is eliminate violent crime. I mean, the number one responsibility of government is to eliminate violent crime, to eliminate crime, period. So neighborhood. So if the government won't do it, neighborhoods could have neighborhood watches, or I don't know. It's very, very hard to establish peace without a government. This is why anarchy doesn't work. Forming your own gang is not going to do it. So you need a monopoly over the use of force. You need a government to institute a peaceful coexistence, and only then can you start investing and building and creating and making stuff and pulling your neighborhood out of poverty. Clark says, did you see Gloria Alvarez is running for president of Guatemala? Can she win? Yes, I've known Gloria Alvarez has been running for president for a long time. Gloria, I promised Gloria that if she wins the presidency of Guatemala, I will become her economic advisor. So that might be my entry into politics. I think Gloria's chances of winning the president of Guatemala unfortunately close to 0-1. She's too young to win. Guatemala has a constitutional, I think, provision that says you have to be 40 years or older. I don't think Gloria is 40 yet. But even if she was, I just don't think Guatemala might be, of all Latin American countries, the most ready because of Universidad Francisco Marroquin, which Gloria went to. But I just don't think any country is quite ready for Gloria Alvarez in a position of political power. But, you know, crazy things happen. And imagine if she gets a significant number of votes, even if she doesn't win, and then maybe next time she is over 40 and she starts building a track record, and maybe she can win. And maybe I'll have to become Gloria's chief economic advisor, which would be a blast, which would be super fun and super interesting to actually take these ideas and put them into practice and see how we can turn an economy around. Richard, catching up with my fellow Richard to reach the goal. Thank you, Richard Zlayer. Yeah, thank you, Richard and Richard. Thank you, both of you. Really appreciate it. That was $20. We're only 16 short of the goal. Andrew says, you seem wary of over-applying nihilism to explain cultural events. Doesn't the high amount of cynicism in the culture imply high levels of nihilism? I don't think, I'm skeptical about everybody who's cynical is a nihilist. I mean, nihilism is a rejection of values. I think a lot of cynics sound cynical, but they have personal values, and they pursue personal values in their personal lives. They have things they care about. I think the number of people who are truly nihilistic, that want to see it burn, that want to see destruction, that have given up on all values, that have given up on life in a sense, I just think in any society is small. Now, they gain influence. The nihilists under the Nazis suddenly gained influence and became, they were still a minority, but they were enough of a minority that they could leverage the cynicism of society to get people to do horrible, horrible things and to feed off of whatever elements of nihilism were in the culture. So I don't want to minimize the problem, but I just don't see it as a massive, in terms of quantity of people. I just think to truly hold a nihilistic view of the world is so evil and so horrific, and its implications are so dramatic that if truly a majority, if everybody was cynical, I mean, let's take the ultimate cynics. Let's take, what's that TV show? South Park. South Park is the most cynical TV show ever produced. It has no values, no positive values. It makes fun of everything. Good, bad, middle, everything it makes fun of. And a lot of it's super funny because a lot of stuff deserves to be made fun of, but it made fun of everything. Are the creators of South Park nihilists? I mean, there's an element of nihilism in their knocking down everything. But are they the same kind of nihilists that want to see the world burn? No. These are, as individuals, they have values, they have things they care about, they want to present a certain view, they have ideas, but they're cynical. And the art is dangerous because I think it promotes the kind of cynicism that leads to nihilism. Okay, Valdrin, and by the way, we've reached our goal, so thank you everybody for allowing us to reach the goal. Valdrin says, we're going to run through these quickly. Elon has embraced and amplified the worst segment on Twitter. Yes, he has. Some are as bad as the usual illiterate bigots on your chat. Some are former criminals. I don't understand why. You know, I think Elon, unfortunately, has been captured by many people on the right who don't quite get the bigotry. They don't quite get the implication. They don't quite get what it actually means. Yeah. But exactly why Elon has done it, I don't know. But clearly Elon was captured by the Jordan Petersons of the world. And Jordan Peterson has definitely facilitated this kind of attitude on the right. Ian Meerkat says, is the Joker a good representation of nihilism? Definitely. Definitely. And what he gets, what the Joker, you know, what he gives permission to people to express their nihilism, because he and this is how a nihilist can set fire to the world. Because if you've got a lot of people out there who might be elements of nihilism in their thinking, elements of nihilism in their soul, but they won't express it because they're ashamed of it, they're embarrassed by it, they suppress it, they repress it. Their cynicism is, they still want things in their own life. And then a joker comes around and he gives them permission for it. And he emboldens them, and he's the guy who brings down the world by rallying the people, giving them permission, I guess is the best word, to burn it all down. Okay, Michael says, in the early days of Reactorism, did our intellectuals believe Rand's ideas would simply march through the culture like a hot knife through butter? I think some people did. Hot knife through butter, probably not, but I think they thought it would be a lot faster and easier. And I thought Rand did as well. At least among certain people, she thought this would go faster and easier. She thought she'd see some intellectual support, some support among intellectuals. And I think she thought she'd see a lot of support among businessmen. And she didn't quite. Michael says, choose your battles wisely, because if you fight them all, you'll be too tired to win the really important ones. Thanks for the advice, Michael. It seems like I'm choosing lots of battles. Michael says, anything that is forced becomes a crime. Yes. J.J. Jigbees, given the past, humans intellectually justified slavery by categorizing slaves as less than human. Does that now show that people knew on some level that slavery was morally wrong? Yes. And indeed, if you go back far enough, they didn't categorize other people as less than human. I think that categorization was only done maybe in the post-Christian era in order to justify it. But I think, in the ancient period, slaves were just people who lost, right? The Romans enslaved people. They didn't think they were less than human. They just thought they were lost, and therefore they should work for me. They'd lost in a war. Everything was perceived through the lens of power. Okay, Gail says, super thanks dollars on YouTube is not available on your replays. I'm a premium member. Anyone else not be able to do that? I don't know why. Super thanks. I don't know why. It's supposed to be there. I'll research it and see if I can let you know, Gail. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Ertan. Let's see, last question from Vosh. Vosh says, nothing to comment, but I suppose why not help? You seem like a decent gent. I suppose one question. Could you explain productive work and its relation to a meaningful life going through Rand's work? I'm glad you're going through Rand's work. But yes, I think that Rand thinks that human beings need a purpose in life, that they need a central purpose in life. They need something to integrate their life around. And for most people, that thing that they integrate their life around is a central purpose. That central purpose is productive work. And productive work is the creation of values in the world out there, creation of values that you can then trade in order to live, in order to be able to survive and to thrive and to build and to create and to make and to produce and to live a good life. So productive work is both necessary in order to survive, because you have to gain the material things necessary for you to survive and to thrive. But it's also where one finds one's own self-esteem, where productive work is where one challenges oneself, where one confronts reality, and in a sense challenges oneself to deal with reality in a way that allows one to move forward. So it is essential, for self-esteem and for the idea of self-worth. So it's hard to have a meaningful life without a central purpose in one's life, and again, for most people, that is productive work. All right, guys, thank you. Wow, it's late. It's over here in Barcelona, it is 11 p.m. at night. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'll try to do as many of these shows as I can as I'm traveling. Tomorrow I'm still in Barcelona. I'll try to do a show tomorrow sometime. It might be earlier. It might be actually in your morning. But it's going to be what it is. So thank you all. Don't forget, if you want to support the show monthly, Patreon, Subscribestar, or YaronBrookShow.com/support. And thanks to all the super chatters. Really, really, really appreciate the support. And I'll catch you all maybe tomorrow, if not, one of these other